Canada's premiers are pushing hard for infrastructure support from the federal government as 2 days of meetings wrap up in Winnipeg.
Premiers are calling on the Prime Minister for a dedicated First Ministers meeting on these critical infrastructure priorities.
Danielle Smith is the Premier of Alberta. Premier, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks, David, for having me. I appreciate it.
You and your fellow premiers are looking for a First Ministers meeting on infrastructure to deal with critical infrastructure and trade infrastructure. The priority in Ottawa seems to be maybe housing as the next big infrastructure push. Is there a clash of priorities maybe brewing between the provinces and Ottawa here?
You know, I think it can be all of it. We want to look at community infrastructure. That includes things like housing. We also want to look at the economic infrastructure, and that's things like ports and rail lines, new highways, and also the competitive infrastructure. And those are things like looking at the United States, investments in batteries, investments in carbon capture, utilization and storage, transmission lines, building out hydrogen. And so we think all three of those should be a priority for the federal government, and we do need them at the table to assist us, because some of those areas are their jurisdiction. Other areas are ones that we need to cost share on. But I think all of those have demonstrated that in each province, everybody wants to see the Prime Minister and the federal government work collaboratively with us.
I saw a lot of premiers today saying they wanted the meeting. I saw a lot of premiers saying they wanted the money. And I saw a lot of premiers saying they don't want any conditions. I mean, how much of a flashpoint could this be? Because typically this government wants to use its money to get outcomes that fit its priorities.
I can tell you from my perspective, I just want them to make a decision. In Alberta, we've been calling for economic corridors to be developed since the 1930s under William Aberhart. And it's been a long time since we had some of these big nation-building exercises. And yet we have now seen with the port strike in Vancouver that isn't just a localized problem. The port of Vancouver is the port for Alberta. It's the port for Saskatchewan. It's the port for Manitoba. We need to have more ports, more access points, more exports, because that's really what's going to drive the economic growth, which is going to allow us to generate more revenue, which is going to allow us to address the needs that we have, but also address the affordability crisis. And I feel like the federal government really does need to take a lead in an area that it has the constitutional jurisdiction. So we're just going to push them along on that, because every single province benefits when we project more of ourselves on the international stage.
Right. I want to get to the port issue in just a second, but I just want to stick with infrastructure and conditions, because the Trudeau government, they're preparing for some sort of a big housing push coming in the fall. And we've even seen people like Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre saying they want to accelerate housing, and they're willing to take money away from lower orders of government that don't meet the conditions that they're prepared to set out. I mean, can you advance on these issues without accepting some federal conditions?
Well, I can tell you the kind of things I'd like to see on housing. One would be that we want to try to clear away some of the permitting delays, and that requires us to work with our municipalities. So let's get rapid approval processes, development plans, and permits so that businesses can start construction. But I can tell you where I feel I might be on a collision course with the federal government, because they have this green buildings plan, and it seems to me that they want to try to stop homes from being hooked up to natural gas, which is impractical in my province. In my province, the vast majority of our homes use natural gas for home heating, for fireplaces, for our hot water heaters, for our stoves, for cooking our food. And so if that's the direction that they're going to go, that these are the conditions, that's going to be a non-starter for us. What I would like to do is focus on working with the federal government on dealing with the base issue. We've got a ton of people who want to live in our country, a ton of people who want to live specifically in Alberta, and we need to be able to ensure that new land comes on available, that efficient construction happens, that we've got enough laborers so that we can build and keep up with that level of growth. I don't want to see a bunch of ideological proposals put on the table. We need some practical decisions here so that people can get into houses.
But if it goes in that direction, you say you could be on a collision course with them. You brought in the Sovereignty Act to deal with issues where you're on a collision course with the federal government. Does this become an issue where you may actually use that piece of legislation?
You know, I want the federal government to stop trying to use its federal spending power to manipulate provinces to get federal aspirations met. I mean, we have areas of constitutional authority. I would love for them to stick to their areas of constitutional authority and do them well, and to work with us on that. And when we can find common ground, we do. And I have found common ground. We do have a collaboration on healthcare, which we agreed to a 10-year deal on. We're working on our bilateral agreements right now. That's going very well. They helped us out with the forest fires and making sure that the military was available to lend a hand. And so it doesn't have to be a fight on everything. So I'm going to be hopeful that they are coming to the table with this in good faith, knowing that in every single of our large cities, we're beginning to face a major housing crunch because of the success, because people want to be in Canada and people want to be able to move to the big cities and take part in what we have to offer.
But, you know, Premier, on a related issue, the last time we talked about the 2035 net zero grid target that the federal government has set and clean energy regulations and how that can apply there. Jonathan Wilkinson, in response to your concerns about that, has doubled down, saying he thinks this is very doable for Alberta. So if they try to steer you in that direction, does that become a Sovereignty Act issue for you, or are you hoping to just hammer it out in classic federal-provincial negotiation style?
Well, first of all, he's wrong. This is not doable in Alberta. 90% of our electricity right now is generated from natural gas. And if they think it can be 100% abated in 12 short years, I must tell you, I'm not sure what he's anticipating happening. Because I can tell you with the things I've indicated that we can do. We want to work with British Columbia and with Manitoba to try to bring some of their zero emissions electricity across with transmission lines. That can't be permitted and constructed and hooked up to the grid in the time frame that he's talking about, but it certainly can if we're looking out at 2050. We also know that small modular reactors are one of the things that Ontario is taking the lead on. Well, we've never had nuclear in Alberta, and so it's going to require a brand new regulatory process to figure out how we would be able to get that installed on site. I suppose we can work with them to see if we can accelerate some of that, and if they're prepared to work with us, that's fantastic. But these are not projects that are very easily permitted and approved. If you look at Site C in British Columbia, for instance, that began the approval process from a conceptual stage in 1954. And so if we're going to be doing a major overhaul and a complete revision of how our electricity system works, they have to be realistic about what the time frame is for that. 2050, I think, is achievable. 2035, it's not. And that's why we're having this working group, so that we can maybe bring them up to a little bit of the reality of what we're facing in those provinces that are reliant on hydrocarbon fuels.